Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get started. I think there's some people trickling in, but we have a very full program, so we want to get going. My name is Victoria Sung. I'm the Phyllis C. Wada Senior Curator here at BAM PFA, and it's immensely rewarding to see all of you here with us for today's program, organized in conjunction with the exhibition Teresa Hakyoung Cha Multiple Offerings. Today's program is going to run until 3 p.m. Kathy, Brendan, and Divya will be in conversation for about an hour, and then there will be some time at the end for Q&A, so please save your questions that come up during the conversation for that time. Our galleries are also open until 7 p.m. tonight, so if you haven't yet had a chance to see the exhibition, I encourage you to do so after the program. Gallery admission is included with your ticket, so hold on to those. Before I introduce the conversants, I want to thank a number of people for making today's program happen. Tausif Noor, Curatorial Associate, who worked alongside me on the exhibition, catalog, all of the related public programs. Tausif's contributions have been indispensable to the project. Sherry Goodman and Sean Carson from our Education and Public Programs team. Thank you for your meaningful collaboration and for ensuring everything is in order, always behind the scenes. And of course, our incredible theater and visitor experience staff for bringing us together here safely and smoothly for this completely sold out event. Lastly, we have been grateful at BAM PFA to partner with UC Berkeley Center for Korean Studies and Kyulpo, who is our community partner for this program. Okay, so let's jump in. This conversation among these three brilliant poets and writers came together during the planning of the exhibition Multiple Offerings. Drawing on the radical generosity of Teresa Hakyoung Cha's multidisciplinary practice, Kathy Park Hong, Brandon Shimoda, and Divya Victor have all thought with and through the legacy of Cha's work, in particular her 1982 publication, Dictee. And over the last many years, they have each crafted their own approaches to writing in relation to such themes as imperialism, displacement, exile, and subjectivity. I can't think of three people who I'm more excited to hear from individually and in dialogue with one another. Kathy Park Hong is professor in class of 1936, first chair in the College of Letters and Science in the Department of English. We are so lucky to have her here with us at UC Berkeley. She is a writer and poet who has published 3 volumes of poetry, including Translating Moum, Dance Dance Revolution, and Engine Empire. Her creative nonfiction book, Minor Feelings, which I have here, was both a Pulitzer Prize finalist and received the National Book Critics Circle Award for autobiography. And I have to say that it's absolutely thanks to Kathy and her chapter on Cha and Minor Feelings, which is titled Portrait of an Artist, that Teresa Hakyoung Cha was introduced to a more public consciousness well beyond the art world and academia in the last 5 years. Brandon Shimoda is the author of several books, most recently The Afterlife is Letting Go, on the memory and forgetting of Japanese American incarceration, published by City Lights in San Francisco in 2024, and Hydra Medusa, Poems and Prose from the U.S.-Mexico Borderlands. With Brin Saito, he co-edited The Gate of Memory, Poems by Descendants of Nikkei Wartime Incarceration, from Haymarket Books in 2025. And The Afterlife is Letting Go here is a deeply researched, poignant witnessing of the aftermath of Japanese American incarceration that brings together a polyphony of descendants' voices on grief, loss, and the instability of memory. I told Brendan that I started reading this one night and I woke up at 2 a.m. and just found myself completely engrossed and had to finish it until 6 a.m. that day. Divya Victor is a Tamil-American poet, essayist, and educator. She is the author of Curb, which won the 2022 PEN American Open Book Award and the 2022 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. Her next book, Kin, a collection of essays, is due out from Graywolf in 2027. She is the recipient of a 2025 Creative Capital Award for this work. And Divya is the author of Kith, which I have here. And before I began reading this, I was looking at one of the endorsements, and I loved seeing this. One of the writers says, Kith is and I quote, a luminous work of multiple telling with multiple offering, as Teresa Hakyoung Cha might say. And so for those of you who are familiar with Cha's phrase, and of course the title of the exhibition, there are beautiful resonances among Divya's writing and Cha's. If you've read Dictee, I highly recommend you pick up Kith. It is similarly genre-defying, and it's a book that, I quote, is part anthem, part instruction manual, part memoir, part dictionary. It encompasses such a wide range of subjects, from an interrogation of John Singleton Copley's Watson and the Shark to the colonial violence around salt production in Gujarat, India. I also want to point out that all three writers' books are in our bookstore. So if you're interested in reading them and getting your own copy, please stop by our shop on the way out. They're definitely worth the read. Divya has also published, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Scheingleichheit, Dry Essays, Natural Subjects, Unsub, and Things to Do with Your Mouth. All right, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Kathy Park Hong, Brendan Shimoda, and Divya Victor.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I have been waiting for this conversation. I see this as a conversation between, I'm having a conversation between two poets, but also with two friends. And I'm such a fan. I'm a fangirl of both of your books. And I see a lot of affinities between us and also with Teresa Ha-Kyung Cha. And so I'll be moderating the conversation, but I think we were talking about just treating this conversation as the conversation after the conversation that you have at a bar. So we're hoping to sustain that spirit. I was just gonna say, there's so much of Cha in your own writing. Both of you create these like counter narratives that are counter narratives through these brilliant assemblages of voices and genres, and you also, both of you are so engaged in the collective, in the community, in the way that Cha also was. And I thought maybe we could begin our conversation by talking about being in this space, being in Berkeley, where Cha also she went to Berkeley, she got her BA here, and she also got two PhDs, two masters here. So this is her home, and it's a homecoming of sorts to have her exhibit here. And so I just wanted to begin by talking about the exhibit. And after seeing it, you just saw it this afternoon. What stayed with you? What work stayed with you afterwards?
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm fresh from the exhibition, and midway through it, I texted Brandon and said, "It is a real struggle not to weep." And afterwards, we were discussing what was the quality of the tears. What is the lining? What is the affect around the tears? And for me, it was relief, tears of relief, seeing her work, having been introduced to it in 2007, 2008. And the piece that stays with me now, and I think will stay with me for a while, is this untitled film work that's been provisionally titled Paper. It's the one in which she's sitting at a desk or a table with reams of paper, as well as sheaves of paper, as well as crumpled paper. So paper in a variety of shapes. And she is engaging with the sheets individually in a manner that I would call kind of mischievous, slightly belligerent, even rude. So she's punching it, she is flipping it, rifling through it. And there's a kind of mischievousness to it that I think is distinct from how we usually receive and imagine her work, which is, so invested in like the sacred and the meditative and the quiet. But there's a real kind of adolescent, miscreative impulse in this work that I was so excited by. And I think it for me, reopened the heart of the oppositional quality in her work. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to think about what the tears were, why they came and where they came. And did you also get emotional the first time you saw?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I've seen it 3 days in a row. I've come here 3 days in a row. And the first day I came, at a certain point, I realized I wasn't breathing. I was walking from piece to piece, just kind of holding my breath in. And I started feeling a little bit, it started to hurt, but I wasn't aware that that's what I was doing until I walked into the exilé room, the room inside of the room. And there was something about going into that room that I exhaled. I'd never make the connection before between exilé and exhalation, but I let my breath go, and the emotions came, and I didn't really know why, and I still don't know why, and I guess maybe I'll figure that out later in writing.
Well, I'm just thinking about the title of your book, The Afterlife is Letting Go.
Yeah. We came out of the exhibition today, and I said, I don't think I can talk about this. Because you're asking what is staying with me, but I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's like it's kind of this belated feeling where you have to. I didn't want to talk about it after the first time I saw it, but I was I was overwhelmed with both awe and sadness, I have to say. But when I went inside, I felt her. I think there's been so much about her writing, in her writing too, about her erasure, and I just felt her presence. And I also loved that video of her throwing paper, because you saw her personality, and she was, I don't know, there was also Char was also badass, and we forget about that she was also badass, and you saw a little bit of that too. And I think the sorrow was also seeing, the white dust of Mongolia. I keep saying Magnolia. I don't know why that, maybe because it's spring, but it's white dust of Mongolia. And, that was an incomplete film. That was a film that she was working on towards the end of her life, right? And she couldn't finish it because she was kicked out of South Korea before she could complete it. But it was so beautiful to see that film and to see shots of South Korea, shots of Seoul in 1980. So I just found it very, very moving,
And to think then of that sadness and the kind of mourning that comes with it. And I love that this exhibition has not allowed us to see her work as a termination, but as a continuation through, Cecilia Vicuña's work or our work. And I've been thinking then about why mourning is such a creative practice, that it's not mere ritual, that it's not mere a performance of end, but rather an insistence on like what ends must create. Therefore, it is a kind of thereforeness, thereforing of a practice.
Yeah, I think I love what you're saying there. There's an ongoingness to her practice through her influences, through the lineage of other writers who she also, writers and artists that she also inspired in the exhibit, but also with both of you too. And I also wanted to kind of turn to your work, and so that you could talk a little bit about maybe you could start with how you first discovered Dictée, and and what in what way she inspired you with your poetry and essays.
I just wanted to say something really quick that I thought of about being in the exhibition. When I first came here a couple days ago, I ran into Vicky, and I was entering the exhibition through the exit. And you said, no, go to the entrance. And I thought that, for some reason, that was really funny, thinking that there was a particular way that I had to enter into it. And I was reading in one of her statements about the plurality of entrances. And I did feel like, well, I could, parachute in from the ceiling, and that might also be legitimate. But I discovered Cha through you. And when you came to the school where I teach, I introduced you. I don't know if you remember, but in your first book came out in 2002, Translating Malm.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I had no idea.
You don't remember it came out in 2002?
That I do remember, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But no.
Yeah. So so this is really special for me because 24 years later, I was working at a bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina. I was the book receiver. So I would open up all the boxes of the books, and your book came in. Somebody had special ordered it. This was 2003. And I opened it up and I read the epigraphs. There was one by Bakhtin and then there was one by Cha. She mimics the speaking. And I don't know what it was about that line and also about your book, but I went after work, I went to the used bookstore in town and Dictée was there. And I don't even know, I think I was too intimidated to read it. I read your book first and then I had Dictée with me. And I remember feeling like, and this isn't going to make any sense, but I remember feeling like it was a computer. Like it was the internet. I remember feeling like it was the internet.
It was so new.
No, well, was the internet new in 2003?
Back then, I think it was pretty new, don't you think?
I don't.
Oh.
Yeah. That it could teach me anything I wanted to know, and I don't know why. I don't know why I felt that way. So I credit you. I thank you. And then I read your book, and that, like, the experience of that brought me back to Dictée. So yeah, that's how it started.
I love this so much. Thinking about Dictée as the internet is solidly healing. I also really like, Brandon, what you're saying, that it would teach me anything I wanted to know, or that it would be this portal, right? This multiply opening portal. And that was very much my feeling too when I came to Dictée. I think it must have been in 2008-ish. I was doing my PhD at the Buffalo Poetics program, and the Korean-American poet Myung-Mi Kim taught this book in our seminar. And I had gone to Buffalo in particular to study under Myung's tutelage because I had read her book Dura. Oh no, her book The Bounty, when I was an undergrad and very new to this country. I came to the US from Singapore when I was 18, and if you come from the British, having been steeped in the British canon, and Myung-Mi Kim is the person you're reading, it's like your head is spinning. You know, it's 360 degrees. It's like The Exorcist, really. And I was so incredibly convinced when I read Myung that poetry had to be the only final bastion, that I went to study under her, and she taught Dictée. What struck me right away, the dedication page to Dictée, to my mother, to my father, with no pause, no break, no differentiation. The utter boldness of and the permission of dedicating the labor of her creative practice to kin, to family, to relation that has helped you survive under a dominant framework, especially to receive that permission while writing in a culture that is convinced of the existence of the individual. You know, so for me, Cha was the radical opening of kinship as a helpful paradigm. And also the emphasis on language as the thing that is both acquired and in the process of being a process of attrition. Because I'm a post-colonial subject, and because the way I received English as an Indian is so wrapped up in disciplinary structures, and because I was so bad at French, that dictation and recitation become these places of such disobedience and performance, was very thrilling to me, you know. And it also took me back to some of my earliest memories of inscription, which is, that reminds me, yes, being just a couple of years older than that sound, that beautiful sound, and sitting on the threshold of a tiny kitchen in this one-bedroom flat we used to live in India, And my mom would be cooking, the steam would be rising from the pots, and she would give me these multi-syllable English words to transcribe. And I'd be squatting there with the clipboard and just like winning at life, you know? And that feeling that the word comes from the mother and can be sounded into a small space that feels like a womb again. I felt that in Dictée.
We are also close. We're like 1 degree of separation here, because like, you know, my teacher, that's how I discovered Cha, was through Myung-Mi Kim. And you used to work at the was it St. Mark's Bookshop? Was it? I don't know why I thought it was the St. Mark's Bookshop. Never mind. Okay, we don't have the 1 degree of separation. but
we're sitting next to each other right now.
We're sitting next to each other right now, and you got it from my book. But I feel like that's how Cha. It's like I just feel like when you read Cha, she's handed down to you, you know. And when I first I discovered Cha when I was 19 years old, and I was a college student, and I took Myung-Mi Kim's poetry workshop for the first time, and it was just really amazing when she introduced me to Dictée, because right at that moment when she taught the class Dictée, I was like, a lineage has been established for me, a little tree right now. There's Myung-Mi Kim, there's Teresa Cha, there's Myung-Mi Kim, and there's me. There was no lineage, an Asian lineage before, Asian American lineage, let alone a Korean American lineage. And then that just, like, having that gave me so much confidence. And the way Myung just introduced poetry through Cha was just groundbreaking. And because she talked about, you know, we're going to be writing poetry, we're going to be, you know, writing about our lives. And on the first day, she talked about silence. And she said, a poem is not as much about what you don't say as what you said. It's about what you withhold. And she's like, have silence become part of the poem. And I don't know, I thought that was really radical to me, because I think before I was always told that to write something, you had to tell your story, you know, and it was always a lot of, you know, white professors who would say, tell your story. You need to tell your story. And I was like, well, what if you didn't grow up with stories? Yeah. What if you didn't have bedtime stories told to you? What if your parents were very, you know, recalcitrant about telling you anything? Then I just felt like I was sort of making it up, you know? Mm-hmm. And then when she said, it's okay, you could be silent, you could write about that silence. And I think that was what was so beautiful, was with that disobedience, that refusal. And I think that's what Cha taught me, was the refusal to be articulate, the refusal to be accessible, the refusal to be translated. And that was such a radical act to me. It's that kind of opacity, you know? So, and which both of you also perform, is that sort of refusal, which is so important in writing. I thought my next question would be just like touch on these subjects that, you know, also inspired Cha, which is, I wanted to talk about the archive. Like when you look at her work, when you look at her exhibit, you know, and you look at Dictée, there's so much found documents in her work. And you also see all of the archive in her archive, and the archives that she researched in her art making. And I think both of you are really interested, both of your work is interested in what Hal Foster calls the archival impulse. And both of you, in Curb and After Life is Letting Go, you have written these very powerful books where you ask the question, what happens to the Asian body when they become the enemy of the state? When they become, when they turn from being unknown to a brown terrorist, or a brown terrorist or a yellow peril. And you've dealt with that by, in Curb, you write about sort of the post 9/11 surveillance of Muslims and brown immigrants, and what it's like to walk through a public space as someone who is marked in these really in so many and there's so many beautiful ways you write about it in Curb. And in your book, Afterlife is Letting Go, I call them essays, you call them chapters. I don't know what the official term, what they're chapters.
Somebody wrote about the book as if it was a book of poetry, which is very clearly not a book of poetry.
Yeah. Well,
But-
there are poetic elements.
But I
to-
like that. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'll take that. Yeah.
Okay. Poetry. Okay.
Poetry.
Yeah, okay, I'll say they're poems. They're prose poems. But you wrote a sequence of poems. I'm having to. You wrote a sequence of poems about the afterlife of Japanese incarceration, and you interviewed, which I just recently learned, over 300 survivors of the Japanese concentration camp during World War II. And both of you talk about so movingly about the document, how the document has this outsized power to sanction the value of a life, or sanction the freedom of movement based on their citizenship or based on their legal residency. And both of you question that. But at the same time, you use the document and you repurpose it and you turn it into poetry. So I was wondering if you could talk about that relationship.
I want to point out that so in Dictate there is a page of citations at the very end. I think there's only 2 citations, despite the fact that the book is filled with all kinds of documents. And I don't know if you know anything about that choice, but I find that very inspiring.
Yeah.
That she didn't feel the need to cite everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the idea of the document, I think about my grandfather's FBI file and how in many ways it's so tedious to read that kind of official language, and how the individual is erased by the document that is pretending to be representing that person's experience. There are all these little moments in his FBI file that are negligible, like he looks like he's restraining tears, that kind of thing, when he's being interrogated. And that to me is the thing that pops out of the document, that I then latch onto that and want to spend time with that moment and think about that moment of that experience. And almost against its wishes, the document is unable to really conceal all of the shadows that but I think that's maybe the poetic orientation, is that the documents rarely add up to a picture that is in any way satisfying or that satisfies my desire to learn anything. I'm partly, interviewing people and talking to survivors and descendants. It's people that the people are generally left out, the details that are the actual experience of human beings. Yeah.
Recently I was at Banff, and I met the poet Diana Artarian, and she said something kind of off the cuff. She said, "The archive is a place where knowledge goes to live and where wisdom goes to die," which struck me as provocative enough to really sort of roll it over and over in my head. Kathy, Curb is a kind of documentary work, but I don't think I've written any book that has not been an engagement with documents. And my first book, Things to Do with Your Mouth, is kind of a response to like canons. So like, I was working with like Freud's papers and Charcot's studies of hysteria and Henry James. And I think it's because like the Western canon arrived to me as this document from another civilization. I grew up with a mom who had to quit school early at 17 because her dad had died. And suddenly, it made no sense for a girl child to be in school. And she was a liability, right? So she had to be married off. And she started going back to school when I joined school because she was like, oh, I want my child to have a mother with a college degree. And so throughout my childhood, I have these memories of waking up to go to school, and I would see my mom coming in from the terrace. We had this terracotta terrace with her, like, having just finished reading her Milton and her Shakespeare and her Henry James. But in India, if you're studying through what they call correspondence courses, like long distance courses, all of those canonical works are not coming to you in like Norton editions. They're coming in like cheap, paper thin, onion skin Xerox copies. And so you just have like Milton and Shakespeare blowing around the terrace and pieces of brick and rubble pinning them to your home. So I experienced literature, what we call literature here in this country, as just documentary detritus flying at me into my childhood. And so I engage with all intertext as documentary engagement. From there comes my obsession with, I think what most immigrants are obsessed with, regardless of whether they admit it or not, the bureaucratic document. Passport applications, applications for green cards, immigration paperwork, right? In my family, I think we have guarded our passports more than we have guarded each other. You know, it's like, I think any immigrant here or any descendant of immigrants here know that there is a part of the house where all the documents are, and it's like throbbing. It's like pulsating, you know? And what's that? When there is a fire. It's like, I love you, Mom and Dad, but you know? And so I was very curious in Natural Subjects and then Kith and then Curb about this passionate attachment to the repressed archive in the house, in the closet, in the fireproof box. And I think we have all of these affects and unexplored emotions surrounding those tiny boxes in those forms because they are sites where we have collaborated as family members. You clear the dishes, you wipe the rice off the table, and then you fill out the immigration paperwork. To me, that engagement with the documentary is exciting. That's where I live. And I think the lyric has been the way to reattach life to the dead document.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because your works are also documents. Your books are documents. I mean, the quotes, the interviews are new documents to add to the archive, to add to the imagination of the margins. Like if you haven't read After Life is Letting Go, one of my favorite parts are these passages where you just aggregate all of the different people you interviewed, and it's just a list of everyone saying what they remembered, just pieces, and that's a document. So you remake it too, you reconstruct it. Yeah.
There are several people that are in the book that are here also. Not that I'm going to point everyone out, but there's, I don't know, quite a few.
Mm-hmm. But I was just going to say, you have that incredible chapter /poem/not poem. That's definitions of what an ancestor is or who an ancestor is, which is collectively sourced, is it not?
Yeah. I don't know why I came up with that question, but it felt like if I'm going to think about Japanese American incarceration history, I want to know about ancestors for some reason. Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of people here who answered that question. Was an ancestor, where do you go to be with them? Mm-hmm. By the way, I just want to point out what you were saying about Western canonical literature. I love the idea of it being just like a stack of dirty napkins, blowing around the patio.
Gilded napkins.
Yeah.
That
Gilded
are
napkins, yeah.
Oh, that's.
But I mean, I think thinking about the archive as gilded napkins is a useful way in too.
Yeah. Gilded but dirty napkins.
Gilded but dirty.
Yeah.
I think the way we come to the archive as a tracing of the forensic remnant is quite exciting. Like the dirt of it, the evidence of something beyond the information contained, the traces.
It's funny when we think of the archive, we think of them as like paper or just, or a dusty library when everything is online now, right? We're all walking around. And I think I just also want to know, I mean, like, there has been a lot of writers and artists who've been interested in the archive and questioning the archive, like within the last few years. And I'm wondering why that is. Why is there this like engagement or interest in exposing the violence that is the official archive? Especially now, I just wonder, I'm just thinking about just the politics of it too, because now everything is archived. Nothing is, it doesn't get erased. Everything is online. Everything is accessible. And also we live in a country right now where no one trusts the official narrative.
Yeah.
We've all become suspicious of the American myth, the American narrative, and so forth. So what does it mean to expose the violence of that narrative now, when there are more people who are in agreement with you, Americans, than they would have been even 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
I think there is a tension between, for me, on one hand, existing or performing a livelihood within the academy, which continues to reify the need for official archives, and my work, which is about exiting the archive, right? To expand what counts as knowledge, what counts as worthy information. So like my books are, they use interviews with family members. Sometimes they're just like speculative interviews with people who've never existed. And to count all of those as archivally resonant or important is in tension with the kind of lie of the academy, which is perpetuating the archive as a stable source of information. And I think that tension is where the poet can live. Yeah.
Again, I want to go back to Shah's lack of citations and just thinking about that. I don't know if either of you have thoughts about that, but how the idea of the source maybe becomes secondary, or maybe not significant at all. And then you go into the show and you see that there's a vitrine that has all the postcards and all the actual documents that went into the making of the book, and how, her lack of fidelity, I guess, to the archive in that way. But yeah.
I was talking about this with Dictée. If you read it, none of the photos have captions. None of them, she never contextualizes anything, and there is also no citation as well. So the first photo that you open up is a photo of a cave, and there are markings, and it says, "Mother, I want to go home. I miss you. I'm hungry. I'm gonna go home." And after she was murdered, her brother John Cha told me that like he got that book in the mail for the first time, and he opened it and he saw the inscription, "Mother, I'm hungry. I want to go home." And he was just so distraught. He had to close the book and he couldn't look at it. And but that image was of Korean miners who were they were conscripted to work abroad, and they were buried in the mines, and the Japanese conscripted. There's thousands of Koreans, and so that was what they wrote before they died. But you wouldn't know that, right, unless you were Korean, or even if you were Korean, you probably didn't know that, And I think maybe part of it was kind of prioritizing the audience, right? And this was another kind of refusal, or deciding which audience she prioritizes. And we could talk about that. Maybe we could talk about the audience. And I think that was so radical, was how she was like, I'm not going to privilege the American audience and explain what all of this means. Either you get it or you don't get it. And I think there's also something to that. Hito Sterol also talks about the poor image, the poor copy. And when an image is replicated numerous times, countless times, the resolution becomes poor. The resolution becomes poor. The image becomes ghostlier. And then you are aware of the sort of material, just how it feels distant materially. It's an orphan. It becomes an orphan. And I see these the way she treats the archive as material. And you also feel that. I also felt that when I was looking at the exhibition, you know, she worked with she was on the front line of working with the latest technology. You know, she was a video artist. She was like interested in filmmaking and all of that, like performance art. That was all very new in the 60s. And when she was, but now when you look at, and I think this is the peril, my husband's a video artist, so he should know this, but it's like when you work with technology, work with video art, it becomes outdated. You know, if you're an internet artist, it becomes outdated. So it's like when I was walking around the exhibit, I just noticed how the outdatedness of her technology, the graininess, the clicking of the slide carousel, you know, that we don't. And I think there's something really also beautiful of that, where you see the textural erosion, you know, of time. You know, time is such a huge part of her art making too. But anyway, going back to audience, I was thinking about this question, the dream of the audience, right? She has a performance called The Dream of the Audience. I was thinking maybe you could also talk about audience. To whom do you address your work? For whom?
I mean, I think firstly we've established that Cha was the first internet artist.
Oh, yeah.
We've already established that. I also want to think at some point today about the difference between outdatedness or obsolescence and belatedness as the sort of ongoing lateness, always arriving to something else through the medium that is obsolete. We'll get back to that. For me, Cha's phrase, audience distant relative, is one of the most instructive. It's like an instructive spine for me in how I think about audience. It holds me upright when I move through my practice, structures my gait through my work. Growing up in India, Singapore, and then the US, right? It's almost, for me, it's like a decade here. I'm actually 43, so there's like a 13 years missing in this math. For me, audience cannot be separated from witness and surveyor. So surveillance, witness, and audience are somehow all in this triangle. And growing up in such a highly surveilled environment in India, Singapore, and the US, I think to imagine the audience, I have to imagine them as like outside the possibility of the surveillance of the state, you know? And so I don't know if there are any Indians or Tamilians in this audience, but we have this saying, whenever we're trying to do something that's kind of like breaking a norm or like breaking a taboo, my family might say, "Nalu per enna solvanga?" What will 4 people say? And I kind of grew up with this question, like, who are these 4 people? And I think this is true of a lot of Asian communities, is that you are always being surveilled with this self-deputized anonymous crew that just like, they're like walking around anywhere. And sometimes that's the ancestor, the photograph that's hanging on the wall next to the crucifix. It's like, wow. And then you introduce the security camera and you have the Holy Trinity, you know? But for me, then writing becomes like, okay, if I am writing for these 4 people, it can't be those guys. So I have written for 4 people, but I name them. So Kin, which is this book of essays that I'm writing, I'm teaching myself how to write long form prose, which maybe someone will call poetry and I'll be really mad.
Yeah.
But I like listed 4 people. There's Josh, my husband, my bestie Mriga, and 2 other people. And it's just for the 4 of them. So if it completely fails, like they're already obligated to like it. I've instructed them. So I do think about audience as those 4 people, and I think about audience the way Stein does, which is I'm writing for strangers and myself.
Yeah.
But the best part of this is that the stranger is a relative, is a distant relative too. Yeah.
I've made many audience miscalculations. So for many years I wrote poetry about Japanese American incarceration, and to almost everyone, including myself, the poems didn't make any sense. And there was a part of me that wasn't interested in them making sense, because in the same way that people talk about dictée for them, the experience of incarceration didn't make any sense. So how could I translate that really complicated, confusing situation into anything that made sense? But then there was a part of me that felt like my grandmother can't read or understand the things that I'm writing about her generation. And so I wrote a book of prose, which was also called Poetry in a Review. And I worked really hard on it as prose, thinking I want to write a book that my grandmother could potentially read and understand it and recognize some part of her own experience in it. And I might have to ask my family to verify this, but I don't think she read it. Because by the time it came out, I don't know if what she was reading or if she was reading. So the idea that I was writing for this particular audience, and that audience is the one who didn't receive it, I think was really illuminating, actually. And so I had to reconfigure my relationship to that in general. I was thinking Dictée and Shaw's work might be the first time. So again, this is 2003 or so, where so there's a book that has images and they're not captioned, and they're set beside text that is not illustrated, or that is not a caption or a referent of what the image is, and that a third thing arises. And she writes a little bit about the tertium quid in Dictée, but how maybe she was the first artist who was putting two unrelated things together, and a third thing emerged that was dependent upon my attention. It was happening already. The energy was being released between those two things, but that completely changed how I made anything, where you could put any two things beside each other and have some sort of belief or faith that an energy would release a third thing. I don't know who was before that in terms of books. It's very common now, so it doesn't seem that novel, but I think back then it was pretty radical.
I love that idea. You know, it's a sort of the adjacency of two passages generating something else. You know, I have a lot I want to say. So it's like riffing off what both of you are saying. So it's not necessarily a dream of an audience; it's fear of an audience. You know, and
a nightmare of an audience.
A nightmare of an audience, and surveillance doesn't just come from the state. Surveillance comes from your family, and I certainly feel that way, right? Like when you are, and I think it's also interesting that it's also that transition from poetry to prose where that fear comes in. Both this you want for this expectation. There's the expectation, right, that you are finally writing for your grandmother, and then they don't read it. But it's to you. Other grandmothers can read it, right? There are other grandmothers that can read it. Maybe not your grandmother, but then there's also the fear that when you transition from poetry to prose, that your family may read it, and you know. And I think I don't know if it's just an Asian thing. But there are a lot of, I've come across so many Asian writers who are like, I just can't write about that. I just feel like my family can't read that, and it's very self-censoring in a way. And I want to ask, like, when you're writing prose, do you fear offending? Do you fear offending others? You know,
I mean, it's more than offense for me. I fear that my dad will just collapse. You know, and who I love dearly, who has supported my work, but he's going to find out I've had sex. That my child is not an immaculate creature, you know. And there's worse things, that I used to smoke cigarettes under his nose.
I know, that's such a
kind of
fear.
stuff.
Yeah. I'm almost 50 and I'm still scared of that. Sorry.
Yeah, to be honest, I had to hire like a shame coach to help me write this. Or an anti-shame coach, just to sort of say,
That's a real thing?
It's a real, well, I don't think she wants to be described as an anti-shame coach. but if it helps her career.
You know, there used to be cultural sensitivity readers. Probably not anymore now that we got rid of DEI. But there maybe they could have shame coaches
Shame
instead.
coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I think Asian Americans were shame coaches for white people for a long time. And we were told it's not working out, that shame and guilt are too much of a burden. And I think we're seeing the whiplash against that, the backlash against that. We feel the whiplash. But this is just to say, writing prose essays about contemporary society and art has given me almost no place to hide. And poetry and moving between lyric and document has given me so many nooks and crannies to comfortably just disappear. So I can show up with a lyric positionality when I want, and then the document covers the rest. But in prose, and the prose sentence, my editor keeps saying, but why the metaphor? I'm like, because it's comfy, because I can hide. And she's like, no, say it. And that has been such a difficult mandate, but also a incredible invitation to vulnerability. And to really say, I think it's time my dad knew that I probably smoked some cigarettes.
What's going to happen when he finds out? What's he going to do?
I've fantasized about the disclosure conversation, like dad and, my mom knows everything, right? My mom always has known everything, but I think my dad will have to be introduced to the idea that I'm an adult. Yeah, I think it'll bring us closer, I hope. I mean, I think that's part of the dream of the audience, that intimacy is the result and not estrangement. But I think any good work, right, is risking one or the other.
You're going to have both.
Yeah, great.
Right. You're going to have intimacy where you connect, you make that bridge to all these strangers who you haven't met before, and you're going to piss off some folks. I think if you don't piss anyone off, it's not a good work of literature. But it's harder said than done. I mean, I also was, when I wrote Minor Feelings, for instance, I was scared to death of what my parents would think, and I was actually surprised by how understanding my father was. He was like, Minor Feelings is a great work of fiction. But he said. Yeah. I think that was a slip. I think that's what he wanted to believe. Yeah. My mother, luckily, and this is where language barriers are a real plus, is she can't read it. She's like, she can't read things. But then it was translated into Korean, and she was like, I'm not going to go there. I'm just not going to pick it up. Yeah.
I don't think my father has read anything I've written. Maybe since I was in college. And so, but yet, I mean, this sounds really morbid, but I feel like we'll have a better relationship through writing also after he's dead. So in a way, I'm sort of waiting. I'm not like excited, but I'm waiting for him to die so I can have a much more innocent relationship. And so I can rediscover him or recreate him maybe in my writing, simultaneously knowing he doesn't read my writing anyway. And I'm writing about our family, which is always really, very perverse.
It will give you a kind of psychic freedom. A lot of people don't write about their families until after their parents, until after they're dead, because they just can't. They can't handle the pressure of that surveillance. But you are. I mean, I was wondering if I can ask you about what you're working on now. If you said in class, Brendan visited my undergrad class the other day, and it was fabulous. But you talked about the book that you were working on now, and you have a book of essays that's going to be published in 2027. If you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great. Yeah.
I think that was the book I was talking about. Included I wrote a book about my parents, and my mom is here, and there's my mother's white, so there is maybe somewhat of a difference. My father reads nothing. I share a lot with my mother. I don't like it. I mean, what I wrote, I think I just needed to get it out, and Well, one thing I did want to say, and this is related to all of this, and maybe also thinking about your editor saying, get rid of the metaphor, just say it straight, that I really appreciate about Dictée is that another thing that was introduced to me through that book was that a book could be the record of a process of learning. Because I think most of the books that I was introduced to in school, for example, they were authority. If the voice was that of authority, it was the record of having already learned. Whereas even going to the exhibition, one piece to another, it feels like this is a record of learning. And that's what makes the work so extraordinary. Because if it was trying to do something else, I think it wouldn't be nearly as generous. So I try to do that, and I think about even the book I wrote, which I don't really like, but I can embrace it if I conceive of it as I was learning about something. Then I can learn to love it, even if I don't really think it's very good.
I love that so much. That a book is not a record of what has already been learned, but a record of learning itself. And with Cha's work, with all her stamp work and her mail art, what we also see is that it's a record of conveyance of learning, right? Yeah. So the systematic epistolary conveyance of learning is so thrilling, especially if you think about her as, a child coming to the United States at 12 or 13, and what the letter must have meant to her at that time, what mail must have meant, right? And so the epistolary impulse, so to go from the archival impulse through Foster to the epistolary impulse, is also where I am with my book of essays. So Kin is a book of essays about really sort of undiscussed affects of South Asian diaspora, which, so much of the work has been about mourning and grief and the sorrow of displacement. And I was like, when I was touring my previous book, Curb, I was like, unmarked audiences know how to be very comfortable pitying the brown person. And I was wanting to write a book that could refuse that pity, And I was like, what would really piss them off? Is to write about pleasure and erotic frisson and curiosity, and the real instructedness of rage, right? So this book has come out of that. But the epistolary impulse in there has been how I've handled not being able to write about the intersections and the interdependencies between South Asian Americans and Black Americans, for example, which many of my books have tried to take on. And at the heart of this book is this letter to James Baldwin. It's a response to this essay that he wrote right before Reagan became president, right after those elections for the nation. And I'm kind of updating him on how it's been since Trump has been elected. But this letter is also bringing his attention to our remote drone program in Pakistan as a way of saying, you once said, all the children all over the world are ours. And I'm beginning to think that those who don't recognize that are incapable of morality. And it's a sort of an epistolary update of how we've been treating the children in Pakistan and in Gaza right now as well. Yeah.
Do I have time for one more? No? Should we? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
Okay.
To our audience,
all right.
relatives.
Thank you. Thank you for this incredible conversation. Let's open it up for. Okay, let's open it up for questions. Please don't be shy. There are mics going around.
Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. What an extraordinary thing to witness. That was as moving a conversation about the craft of writing in relation to someone else's work as I've encountered in a very long time. I also encountered Dictée in 2008 in grad school from my Korean American mentor. I also bought my copy at St. Mark's bookstore when I was in New York that summer. The question that I have concerns the first moment of this conversation when the three of you shared profoundly powerful feelings of crying breath holding, the most overwhelming of aesthetic experiences that a person could describe. Proof of art, you know. If you can hold your breath while you walk across the room and not notice that that's what you're doing, something is real. And I'm also, I'm reminded of what I take to be a challenge that Cha has always posed to me, which is the challenge of solemnity. And the challenge of something like, I don't want to say mutedness, because the question of the mute and the loud is so complicated in her work. But that question of minor feelings, to use language slightly, you know, out of kilter. But these feelings are not minor.
Yeah.
These feelings are very, very major. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how it is that this work can seem somehow both so quiet and so loud.
Yeah. Grace, your questions are such poems. I do want to live in them for a very long time. And I agree with you that mutedness is a very complicated, almost like a substance or like a density. I wonder if we can think about the majoritization of feelings, like how a minor feeling shifts when we move elsewhere, where we are part of a majority. So that's one thing I'd like to keep in the air. Is your question about silence and mutedness, or is it about intensity of emotion?
That's the question behind my question. I don't know is the answer to that. Because what I'm struck by is the necessity with which Cha's work poses that question. To what extent loudness and quietness are the metaphorical valence which intensity or looseness of affect have become knowable.
Gosh. Well, I would say that, can I just
Yeah,
step in for a
please.
second? If you reread Dictée, for instance, I wouldn't call that a muted book. And I don't think there are definitely moments, pauses there. There's always tension, there's not the silences, even the silence, the blank pages are very loud, of what is unspoken. But I don't, it's not a quiet book to me. It's not a muted book to me. It's a book that tracks, that is about resistance. It is about these past acts of movements against autocracy, and those passages in Dictée are very loud, and no one was writing about that. The dictatorship against, when she's writing, there's a passage in there where she's writing about the Sigmund Rhee and the mass demonstration against him and what his brother and her brother dying from that, or Yu Guanxun and her it's a book about revolutionaries too. So you could say, I think there is that kind of valence or semblance of silence in her book, but I think actually when you really read Dictée, at least Dictée, and even in Exilé, that there are real moments of anger. First of all, she was writing about America as this machine that purports democracy, but was splitting the countries, splitting themselves in half. No one was doing that, and that was the first time I was reading about the neo-imperialism in Korea that was translated into the English language. As well as, even if you look at Exilé, there's a little poem in there about her always being mistaken for being Yoko Ono. There's lots of mischief in her poetry as well, and her performances.
And the use of image in Dictée in particular, I find very confrontational and not at all muted, though it is solemn. And I think, the image of the mother showing up as in her youth and then as an adult is it's almost aggressive in its implication of survival, So I too don't read it as a muted book, that, especially the insistence on the inscribed text being, you know, a double full spread and so on. But I agree with you that it demands a kind of solemnity that is distinct from the kind of solemnity we're supposed to perform in a church, for example, or in a chapel space within a Catholic school. It's a different kind of solemnity.
And she writes about that too, the kind of obedience that you have to perform. She went to Catholic school, right? Catholic high school, and so
Sacred Heart. I think.
yeah, that's here. Yeah, I think also silence and sound switch places, or quiet and noise, they switch places. And I think a lot about the function of silence in a book like Dictée, but also one of my favorite pieces in the exhibition is the Untitled Candle performance, where she's lighting candles and then she recites this text, and then there's like a minute of nothing when we're just staring at the candles, and then she comes back in, and just that space of contemplation that she offers to the viewer. And I think this is sort of a tangent, but I think one of the geniuses of this exhibition is that you could be looking at this work by Cha that's very contemplative, and you feel drawn into a kind of solemnity, and then you hear Karen Carpenter coming from behind a wall. It took me a while to find out where Karen Carpenter was coming from, and I thought, this is so extraordinary. I love that. Simon and Garfunkel also, but Karen Carpenter really is what got to me. And I was thinking just about the spaces between the works of art, and the silence in that space, and I began to think about silence as a form of measurement. That silence actually makes distance visible, and if you don't have those intervals, then you can't really see anything.
I love that silence as a unit of measure. The way.
Hi, thank you. Divya, I wanted to say I'm a Tamil poet of Nalapayan. I was curious if you had any thoughts about how Cha uses the body in her work. Lately, in my artwork, I've been doing a lot of work with video, and I don't know, this idea of like representing the body or thinking about the body in relation to writing or the body as archive. I was particularly struck by how languages moves through the body in her work. So I was curious why you thought like she wrote and also made video work, and her work is autobiographical in that sense, in this hybrid sense.
Thank you for this question. Can I take this one first? I like get very excited about this. I think she is the first poet that I began to see as like an esophageal poet, who's just really invested in the work of the mouth from the lips all the way in through the thorax, right, into the stomach. And this particular channel is everywhere in the work. You know, it's in, I forget, what is it called? The mouthpiece, the mouth to mouth. And the video work right next to it is it resembles Beckett's Not I, and what's her name? It resembles Beckett's Not I. And there are so many images of the body as it has been labeled as an apparatus for sounding, and that inscribed body is what she's trying to, I think, describe and uninscribe through the work. So to place the way, you know, a Greek muse can be presented as embodied next to a medical drawing of the esophagus and the vocal cords, to produce the possibility of a third way between them, I think is what's so thrilling about her work. And she was also the first poet who, for me as an Asian American, was not talking about identity writ large, but identity writ small in the body, or narrowly, right? So she's interested in like the habitus, interested in gesture, embodiment, not in the abstract, but in the cords, sinew, tissue, tooth, tongue, and lip. And the wetness of it, the unpredictability of it, how much it exceeds conscious activity, that to me is also very thrilling. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say that there's you know, especially in her performances, you know, her filmed performances, it's her body. The body is also a vehicle for channeling, you know. So she was really inspired by what is called the mudang. And so this is a shaman. It's a medium. It's a Korean medium in which they channel spirits, you know. And so, and she does these performances. They're channeling through her. And that's what happens in dictée, what becomes a kind of discipline, sort of mimicry of English or the French language, that is very consciously spoken through the mouth, from the throat to the mouth, eventually becomes a kind of a channeling, you know. Yeah.
One more question. We're here.
Oh, hi. My name is Ala. I'm actually in Callie Park Hong's class, and I had a question because there was some talk about going against this idea of pity and fighting against that, and it brings me to the idea of Cha's dictée. When I was reading it, after I got over that little phase of confusion, I felt more awe than pity because of her literary techniques, right? The way she did it. And I'm curious in your work how you attempt to do that, you know, because you say that, you know, you try to write metaphors, but there's some fight against that, you know, say it literally. So I'm curious, in what other ways do you attempt to revolt against that emotion?
This is something I think a lot about when especially white people interact with Japanese American incarceration history. I've spent a lot of time going to exhibitions on that history, and I love / hate eavesdropping on the white people, because the word I hear the most is shame. What a shame, which is so utterly meaningless, and it just feels like it's just re-provoking the violence, you know, this kind of like fake interest / sympathy. And so a lot of the work that I try to do in relation to that history is to maybe destroy the possibility for a reader to even have that kind of reaction, to move it way beyond that space of pity or way beyond that space of shame, so that there is some other kind of experience, maybe like awe, that a white or other reader might have, that they're engaging it or discovering it in a way that doesn't maybe center their own self-obsession. And I think I'm trying, again, a record of learning. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. So it is moving away from those kinds of responses.
I think one of the most useful things we can do is to draw attention to how guilt and resentment and kind of reluctance has been embodied and generated and sustained by white folks and unmarked folks here in this country. I think any work that is drawing attention to that broader spectrum of emotions outside of what is convenient, like what I think of as like the liberal category of emotions, which includes pity, outrage on your behalf, the willingness to be devastated on your behalf. Anything we can do to push beyond that narrow set of liberal emotions, the better.
Yeah. I just finished a novel, and I think it's like, if we were to look at it through the lens of fiction, I think it's also just to present people as they are, which is, for me, would be to present the people that I'm imagining as they're difficult people. Just write them as difficult people. We're all difficult people. So that is also one way. Okay, that's time. Thank you so much for this special
Thank you, Kathy.
conversation.
Thank you.